Welcome to Containerized Conversations, where we try to containerize our conversation to less than 20 minutes. I'm your co-host, Jesse Caffarelli, and with me
is your other co-host, Josh Warhurst. And today we have a third person in this recording studio, Anthony Kelly, the senior manager of engineering at ConnectRN. Is that true?
I would hope so. Otherwise, I've been lying for the past 7 months.
Fair enough. And what are you and your team working on right now?
We're working on a bunch of stuff right now. A lot of it's just trying to make our platform a little bit more extensible. Our entire business model is allowing clinicians to pick and choose when they want to work, where they want to work, and how they want to work. So the types of roles can change based on their preferences, their hours, things like that. Just something to think about when it comes to this entire ordeal is hospitals and clinics and community centers typically have to hire more nurses than they actually have for full-time work. Because when someone goes on leave, they have to have coverage because of state laws and federal laws. Our platform allows facilities to not do that because they can just augment their staff when they need to, when people go out on leave or on sick time or on vacations, things like that. That's our entire platform, is to just allow that partnership to happen and allow people to basically be flexible with their hours, needs, whether it's worked or needed to be worked.
So basically, it's like Uber for nurses.
Yeah, that's typically what I tell my friends whenever they ask about what my job's doing.
It's pretty cool.
It's especially in today's day and age where people have to work a second job because let's be honest, nursing doesn't pay as well as it should, or they have kids. One of our biggest clientele is their parents, mothers, and fathers who have kids and want to be able to pick up some extra shifts just because they either want more money or they just want to get out of the house.
That's pretty cool.
And then some people just don't like to have a 9-to-5 schedule. That's a huge thing with the younger generation. They don't like the idea of a 40-hour work week. So this allows them to make that flexibility and those changes as how they see fit.
Interesting. And I feel like the flexibility there is the key to the service.
Yeah.
When you joined, what was the state of affairs? Did you see like a lot of work you had to do, or you said, hey, this is basically done and I just have to keep it running?
Yeah. So when I started, I was actually just the manager of cloud engineering. Mm-hmm. And so my entire purview was the AWS account, the footprint of the AWS accounts, the software that ran within it, and how we get from developing our code, securing our code, to deploying our code. I wouldn't say anything was broken. Nothing is truly broken if it's actually running and successfully in production. There was room for improvements. And I definitely went in and, typically, and I don't try and just like boil the ocean. We look at what the business is doing, and then we try to figure out what they're trying to accomplish. And then we kind of piece together what our plan is to get them from step 1 to step 10 and how we're going to do that over the course of months. Now, when you read these books or you listen to a lot of these podcasts, a lot of it's about perfect world. This is how you should do things. But no world is perfect, right? And so in practice, you look at it and you say, I have time constraints, I have money constraints, I have resource constraints, and this is what we're trying to do. But what's the best bang for our buck to get to where we want to be a better business down the road? And that's kind of how I took the approach moving forward at ConnectRN. Was I saw things for improvement and I saw what they were trying to do. And I decided to improve what would give us the most value and would give us the longest runway to be faster down the road. Because every decision, especially in a cloud engineering space or any sort of platform space, it's all about return on investment, because at the end of the day, as a business, your team is considered operational expenses. Mm-hmm. And so you're not really worth as much as a developer because you're OpEx and not CapEx. And so you got to make yourself valuable by showing how much more ROI you can provide through that operating.
And so do you start with things that are primarily like monetarily focused? For instance, like you say, hey, you're spending, $200,000 per month on cloud, and you're using all these resources that you really don't need. Like, we can justify this right away by going down to 185,
Nope.
No.
I will say that 9 times out of 10, your most expensive part of your engineering or software team is not your cloud bill. Your cloud bill is usually the cheapest. Your most expensive part is your developer's time. If you are saying that I have to take 8 hours a week to fix production issues, or 8 hours a week to do deployments because they're not automated, you're talking about thousands of dollars a week that you're throwing away versus $15,000 a month that you might be throwing away.
Because there's a lot of companies that they see once they have a developer that they just have that developer. They're a resource that they can spend. How do you go and convince a company to say, hey, we actually need to make our pipelines better because we actually did spend roughly this amount of developer time? Or is that how you even present it? How do you present it?
Yeah, absolutely. A developer has to quantify their time. Why are they not quantifying the time they spend deploying their resources, fixing production issues? At ConnectRN, we saw that 15 to 20% of a developer's time was spent fixing issues that shouldn't have ever occurred because our production pipelines were manual, or our code wasn't being deployed properly, This is one of the first things we did is every single time we got to take a developer off of doing actual work, it was, we need to quantify that time and say, you just spent 15% of your sprint doing tedious work. And we called it an operational expense. You think that you have 8 developer resources of full-time dev work, but you actually only have 3 developer resources of full-time dev work because the other 5 are spent fighting fires that you don't know about. So when we looked at this, I said, okay, how are we going to fix this? The first thing that I wanted to fix was developers had no access to do anything. And that was because there was a fear of developers having access, meaning that they would be pulled out of their work even more if they had access to fix things. It was, we can't do anything if a developer has to wait on my team of 2 people to help them do something in development or staging when something is broken. They should be able to fix it themselves, document it, and deploy it themselves. And that was step 1.
And that's a very interesting step 1. At the company at that time point, when you came in, where was the organization at that point? Do they have SREs?
So they had a cloud engineering team. It was 2 people, and they started 3 months before I did. At the time, the director of, I forget what her title was at that point, she brought me in saying, we need to bring DevOps to this company. They were very startup focused. They were getting products out fast, but you could definitely see based on the way that their accounts were structured and the way that their access and role-based policies were, is they didn't really think too far ahead of how can this scale out. When I first started, they had maybe 25 engineers. And at the peak, we had almost 60, and we had to be able to scale to what we thought would be 100 before COVID ended, and a lot of that growth started to dissipate. It was just one of those things where COVID threw everyone for a loop, and every tech company thought they were going to grow 1 billion%.
Yeah.
And then no company grew 1 billion% because all of a sudden COVID ended, people wanted to leave their house again.
I don't think it's literally that every tech company thought they were going to grow. It's just that they needed to get the money that was flowing at that point for that growth. And so they kind of had to convince shareholders, and other people said, oh, hey, let's pump money into this stuff because according to the last year, they said, I'm not turning away free money, right? Let's hire 10 people because the money's there to hire the 10 people. And then later, I do think that cloud is interesting because it can scale up and down with need. I think we talked about that. That was one of the things that I never appreciated cloud until I talked to you, which was that not just the scaling up, but the scaling down. People need this service less. You can actually expend less resources instead of buying something permanently to handle the resource need.
So do you have any sort of success metrics that you're, following, that you look at and you go, this last year we were super successful because we hit this number or we did this? Like, what type of stuff do you look at to drive that?
Sure. So I've been at this company for almost 2 years now. One of the main metric is how many deploys per month you do. Right. That to me was a clear indicator of how confident are you in your process to get code to production and not breaking it. Right. So when I first started, I usually spend the first couple of weeks just observing to see what happens. And we would do 1 release every 2 weeks. So that's 2 releases a month. So as of May of 2025, we do on average 172 releases a month now.
It's actually funny. You said like we do a deployment every 2 weeks. I'm like, that's fast. That's good. But now we're at over 100.
Yeah. So we have a lot of our repositories are now commit on deploy. So every single time a developer does a PR into our mainline branch, we deploy to production within an hour. And so that's our second metric, is how long does it take to deploy an app? And we have every app now under 35 minutes to deploy. Most of it just waiting for AWS services to drain properly and for our QA tests to run, because our QA tests now run as part of our pipeline. Our entire deploy process is automatic. It's a completely hands-off approach. And the only time we manually intervene is if we have to roll back quickly. Our rollback strategy is roll forward. If we find a problem, we try and patch it forward. But if we see that it's desperately bad, which happens maybe once a year, we just manually roll back to the previous version.
That's great.
How do you handle like new features in that environment?
So we have a very strict contract between our APIs. Any API contract that's going to be breached, we basically either version or create a new API altogether. If we're creating a new feature, feature B, feature A is going out, we use launch darkly. So we use feature flags to basically turn on and off the feature. And we can kind of turn them on and off as the feature, and we can A/B test them as the feature goes out to make sure that that feature is either kosher and or if it's not kosher, we roll it back without having to worry about it.
Interesting. Okay. So when your developers are developing these features, do they think about backwards compatibility, or is it a completely separate endpoint? You guys don't need to worry about backwards compatibility because you migrate your services to the new endpoints.
All depends on the feature set. We do both. So anytime we touch a current API that's currently in production use, we have to guarantee it's backwards compatible. And we have API tests that our QA team runs that confirm backwards compatibility through those tests. And if they break, the code will stop before it deploys to production. And we do have new APIs that we just production out to the wild if no one's using that, and then they just kind of get used as we deploy new features.
Do you remove things? You say, hey, we're not doing this anymore. The backwards compatibility breaks, but you say, well, we're not really using that feature anymore. So that's fine.
All the time.
Yeah.
We just decide as we're developing, we're like, well, this is kind of complicated, and we're like, no one really uses it. Yeah, we'll just let it break. Who cares?
Yeah.
If we get yelled at, we get yelled at. But most of the time, we have pretty good confidence because we reach out to stakeholders and say, does anyone actually care about this? No? Okay, we're just going to stop supporting it then.
Yep. How often do you, as somebody in your position, actually talk to the customers? Do you find that like you get reports or you're just totally aside of that? You're just looking at, say, metrics that are coming back from like your monitoring service?
So I have very little interaction with our actual clients, and it's something I'm actually actively trying to change. I am a huge fan of focus groups, and I'm a huge fan of like roundtables, and I would love to get on a call with some of our schedulers, some of our clinicians to understand where some of the pain points are. We have events that we meet our clinicians that like our credentialing team will go out and see, our onboarding team or our account managers will go and talk to, but we only get what they tell us back. And I'm a huge fan of hearing from the horse's mouth. I don't really take offense if people say the product sucks. I agree. Parts of our product aren't the best. But the only way I know which ones suck is if you actually tell me versus my metrics just saying, hey, we're getting 200 responses and they're coming back fast.
Yeah. That's good. I mean, I think having that filtered report, like you say, you want to get it from the horse's mouth, because sometimes you get a filtered report and you say, I talked to somebody who was at the event and they said things were mostly good. And you're like, well, what was the...
Yeah,
you said
what's mostly
not...
good is not good. Like mostly good is only somewhat good.
I need some details here, right? Like, what do I work with? And they're like, no, you're doing fine. You're like, no, that's not how I want to.
Yeah, that's not how we grow as a company. That's not how we grow as a person. Yeah. Honesty is key there. And when we start beating around the bush and sugarcoating things, all it does is makes the business move slower because you're beating around a bush trying to find the answer.
Yeah. How do you view the industry right now in response to like DevOps? Like, how are you feeling about it? What's the waters?
I think that the DevOps term needs to die.
Mm-hmm.
I think that everyone reads the Phoenix Project. I think that everyone listens to a podcast. I think that everyone reads the Google SRE handbook and they think this is how things need to be done because this is how Google does it. This is how Gene Kim told me to do it. And when you walk in with that type of attitude of we have to do it this way, we have to do it the Google way, you're instantly failing the company because you're not taking into account what the company needs and what would actually make them successful. DevOps is just a bunch of ideas that you can do to make your job easier. Which ones you do are up to you and what the business really needs to do. For ConnectRN, it was we need to have separate AWS accounts where our developers can break things in dev and staging, and it never makes it to production. It was we need to keep everyone hands off on the deployment process and keep the deployments consistent so they never break. It was we need to keep developers working and not having them always go back and look at why did this deployment fail, things like that. But we don't really need a strong incident response management team, right? We're a small company. So like all we really do is get a hold of someone during the day. So I think that people just need to relax when it comes to how do we do DevOps and need to start looking at how do I make my team the most efficient and what steps can I take to do that? And most importantly, how can I do it in a way that's not going to make everyone hate me? If you go into a business and say you're doing everything wrong, we got to break it all and start from scratch. All you're going to do is make enemies. We talk about mental change. And yes, some people just want to dump everything that they're doing and try again. And all you're going to do is fail.
Any general tips for people who are starting out right now, today in 2025? If they were trying to go on a similar path to you in your career, any tips for them?
Don't use AI.
Controversial.
Start now with a heavy hitter.
I'm going to go with the heavy hitter.
Okay.
I think AI is a fantastic tool once you understand what you're doing. If you're going to start using AI as the basis of your career, you're already failing at learning what you need to do to be good at your job. Our jobs, it is not hard to write Terraform code. It is very hard to problem solve. And if you're trying to get AI to problem solve for you, you've already lost.
Yeah. And well, we just did a whole episode on using ChatGPT and how it affects your learning capabilities if you use it without, having an original idea first.
I read an entire study on how our jobs might actually be safer than they were before AI. Because every engineer graduating that's using AI is actually unable to work in a real world environment.
Yeah.
And just think about if this continues for 5-10 more years. And I think AI is a great tool to help you do the tedious stuff. But when it comes to solving a problem, it is garbage at it. And then if all it's going to do is train on more garbage code, it's just going to cannibalize itself. And I think that's going to be OpenAI's biggest issue is not to cannibalize your data sets.
Yeah.
I remember seeing somebody say that their idea of code was like a normal distribution where most of the code is right in the middle. It's like mostly good code. And it's just like there's some great code at the edges and some terrible code at the edges. And they're like, no, all the stuff that AI has been trained on, it's all the bad code in the beginning, and the great code is out here where it's like so rare and mystical.
Not only that, but good code is protected. You don't put good code on GitHub. You sell good code proprietarily.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And the last other part of that is AI is right now, like, you can't feed it your company structure. You can't feed it the problems that you're dealing with if you can't even understand what the problems that you're dealing with are. So right now, I think AI is great if you're super specific about what you want to do. But if you can't formulate that, if you can't come up with what your problems are with your company, and it sounded like when you started at ConnectRN, you said, hey, what are the problems that we have? Right? Let's observe for a couple weeks. Let's talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then let's go and start working on a solution. How long did it take you before you actually said, let's commit some code?
So the two engineers that like I would be working with to try and make this happen would spend Tuesday to Thursday deploying code. And let me be very clear about how painful it could have, how painful it was. Tuesday to Thursday, they'd commit code. And between Tuesday and Thursday, no developer was allowed to commit code that wasn't for that week's release. So developers would sit there from Tuesday to Thursday twiddling their thumbs. And then on Friday, they'd commit all of their code because the deployment went out. And then on Monday, we'd have to do the entire thing. So between when I started and the end of the year, my entire focus was, I've already found the first problem. We need to free these guys this time up. And so we just automated their current job of doing deployments via GitHub Actions. And so we still did the once a week release where it was like we cut the release on Tuesdays and deployed on Thursdays or whatever, and you had 2 days to test. But the deployments only took 12 minutes, and then that was the end of it. And then I would say you have your dev branch, your staging branch, your prod branch, and each branch relates to an environment. Our first major change was getting rid of that. And so the ultimate goal, if we talk about DevOps, quote unquote, is when you commit to master, you commit to production. Everyone's first thought is, let's just go and do that. And my first thought was not, let's just go and do that. My first thought was, let's get everyone on a single branch, and that's where all of our code gets deployed from. But instead of deploying off of master, we'll create a release branch, and we'll deploy off the release branch because our developers are still not good enough at committing code that can go to production successfully. And so that's where we started. We went from dev, UAT and prod to master and a release branch every week. And that happened. I kept that for all of our repositories for probably close to 6 months just to get them used to that idea. And then all I said was, hey, when we didn't have a single commit to a release branch for like 6 weeks because our code was going out, I said, we're getting rid of the release branch. We're just pulling off master. It took us close to 6 to 8 months to do that because, like I said, you want buy-in. You want to get people to trust the system. You don't want to like force them to accept it because all they're going to do is try and sabotage you. Not on purpose, but like they need to protect themselves. By showing that it works, gaining their trust, they're more receptive to that change. And then it became a lot easier to make that happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that you put it so clearly, the problems of how much developer time was wasted. I think that there's a lot of people, they jump into an organization and they see that kind of, but you were so quick to identify that. There's a lot of times where somebody comes in and they say, isn't it weird that it takes Tuesday to Thursday and all these other developers are sitting on their thumbs? They can't, I don't know what the metaphor is.
They can't do their job.
But they can't do anything while these people are releasing, and we're doing this pretty regularly. And other people will say, that's just how it's done here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
It's just how it is. And it's just like, that's not the correct answer. Like, you are part of the problem because you know it's a problem, but it's just how it's done.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And I think obviously identifying that and then also coming up with a solution and bringing the company along. I think the piecemeal way that you did it makes a lot of sense, where you said, yes, our goal is to deliver off of main, right?
Yes.
But we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And we need to ease people into this. And I think that sometimes the heavy-handedness of developers who have this ideological way of doing things, they'll go and say, well, this is what we're doing, damn it. And they alienate half the company, and then
and
they don't ever get their goal.
I think we can all agree that the technical solve of that is very easy, right? The technical solve of deploying off of master, which all of these books tell you is the right thing to do, it's very, very easy to do. The culture change to have the confidence to do it is the hardest part. And that's the thing that we had to work on the most, was gaining confidence in our abilities to deploy regularly. And the only way we could do that was by doing it incrementally. If we had done it out the get-go, all it would have done was cause more problems in production, would have made all of our executive managers and our executive leaders pissed off, and we would have been dead in our tracks. And so we have to be very careful, because you need to also, again, keep moving forward with the business. Otherwise, the business will just throw you off the boat, basically.
Yeah. One of the things we talked about in one of our other episodes was don't push DevOps. Focus on problems and push solutions.
Exactly.
Right? And I think you're nailing that head on.
Yeah.
So I guess the real question is the word DevOps transformation, is that dead, right? If we say focus on problems and solutions, don't push DevOps, is there a transformation, or is that you do not focus on transformation? Do you focus less on that part?
Let's shift the paradigm. Let's think outside the box. Like, it's a jargon word that we all kind of agree on, which is just, we want to be more efficient with our time. Everything that I've ever thought about with DevOps is we want our time to be used efficiently and productively. And sitting here arguing about who's responsible for this code is not efficient. Or sitting here and arguing about why the deployment failed is not efficient. And I think when DevOps first came out, that was the solve that was trying to be made. But then everyone just jumped on the bandwagon and just ruined the term. And now it just became another jargon word. I don't think it's dead, but I do think it has a negative connotation to it now.
Yeah, you have to do it undercover.
Under the guise at night, right? The eagle flies at midnight.
Sometimes these terms are like the terms that I don't want to say the experts, but there are terms that you use to filter what you're looking for. But the moment you bring it up in a casual chat, it's useless. DevOps, as a technical term, it's still working, but as something that's emotionally effective to bring in other people, maybe it's lost its value.
I think it's just so broad too. I think one of the biggest issues is when you say DevOps, it sounds so broad and so encompassing that it's so ambiguous to what's going to happen. Even if you just use some parts of the DevOps process, hey, I want to start looking at implementing CI/CD, or we need to start looking at telemetry, or we need to start looking at better alerting and monitoring, things like that. At least you're kind of shrinking what you're trying to change and what you're trying to look at. It makes the conversation a lot easier. If you say, hey, we should bring DevOps in, it's like, okay, there's 1,000 different ways to define DevOps. Which one are you? Like, are you the dev operations now just write code? Are you the guy where developers are on call all the time? It's like, well, no, we should start looking at how we can be better.
Yeah, I like some of the holistic thinking. I don't really know exactly what term can replace. That is why DevOps has splintered out into things like SRE and platform, and there's a couple more things that are trying to be a little bit more specific.
But even in SRE and platform, right? Aren't they two heads of the same coin?
Yeah.
We have a lot of episodes on that.
Companies are trying to be different. And so they change the title because either the pay bands are going to be different or something slightly different. But at the end of the day, we're all just engineers.
Let's say that you are starting a company. How would you organize the company?
Well, I think that everyone needs to be a subject matter expert in everything, right? I think that every company has someone that's a jack of all trades. We can call them a Brent if you want. But we always need to have a subject matter expert. So if you have a website, you always need someone that is primarily focused on front-end engineering, right? But I don't want someone that's only a front-end engineer. I need someone that's a front-end engineer that understands how APIs work, because we don't have time in this world in 2025 to have a front-end engineer be like, hey, this is broken. I'm putting this in block, so back-end engineer. They need to be able to say, hey, this is broken. This is the code. I think I can fix it. Let me go put it to a PR for a back-end engineer to look at. And so, yeah, you should always have a front-end engineer. You should always have a back-end engineer. You should always have someone that's very focused on infrastructure, but they should be able to do other parts of the business as well. But at the end of the day, they're solely responsible for their domain. But we talk about communities of practice. Their responsibility is also to expand their domain to everyone else so that they feel comfortable doing the same type of work. They just might not be as fast at it. And so a perfect example is my front engineer at the company is now doing back-end work because he showed some interest. And I was like, yeah, go do it. If you can write back-end code, I can now give you project solo and my life becomes so much easier.
If you were hiring a front-end engineer, though, would you say, hey, we also need DevOps experience, right? Or how would you go and try to hire that?
That all goes to the interview process. I have no problem interviewing 100 people saying I want a front-end engineer and finding someone that can talk to me about back-end work or infrastructure work. Yeah, I spun up a React web app and I just threw it in an Nginx container because it was a single page app, or I threw it up in S3 because I wanted to test it. That is so much better than someone saying, yeah, I write React code and then I press a button and it deploys to Git and then Git does all the work for me. That person to me is no better off than someone straight out of the college, because they don't know what they're actually doing other than writing code, and they don't know anything about the actual process about their business.
Yeah, that's good. That was our containerized conversation. Thank you, Anthony, for your wisdom, and we'll be sure to have you back in the future because this has been pretty great. I'm Josh Warhurst.
I'm Jesse Caffarelli.
Have a good night.